Welcome to another episode of the Robinson-Hewitt Pod. This is where we talk about the future of technology and what does it mean to be human in the next era of tech. I'm your host, Alison Mackey. I'm a futurist, anthropologist of emerging technology, and founder of Robinson-Hewitt Consulting. Welcome. So, if you caught last week's episode on the future of food, this is going to pick up on a similar conversation that we had in that one. So we got into things like Ozempic and how that's reshaping what we're reaching for when it comes to our food and how that's changing everything on a market level. And, starting to pull on that thread of that conversation, I started asking myself bigger questions about all of that when it comes to personalized health and wellness. And where are things like biohacking and, having access to data constantly? What is that having on the future of our own personal health? And I want to be upfront at the top of this episode that this is going to hold a little bit of tension. I'm so over the idea of things being good versus bad when it comes to health and wellness. And that comes from personal experience. So I've had eras where I've been on bed rest and been really unwell. I've also had eras of my life where I've been really fit and healthy. And, the eras of my life where I've been unwell have actually taught me the most about myself. And I've had some genius level breakthrough ideas during those eras. The water project actually came from me being on bed rest. And then there's also been eras of my life where I've been completely healthy. And I don't even know if that's like actually living because you're living by data sets and tracking calories and steps and all of that sort of stuff. So I kind of want to come at this from a really balanced perspective, having come from both sides of being unwell, but also being super healthy in my life. And I think that double-sided lens is what's making this conversation worth having, actually, because in the world of wearable technology and biohacking and health optimization, you can get overwhelmed very quickly. So this is my unsolicited 2 cents from someone who has been sick and someone who has healed myself through blending technology and holistic health as well. And I still consider wine being part of my future health plan, because there's more to life than just having a great sleep score. So let's look at the current state of play when it comes to personalized health and wellness in the tech space. So right now, health for a lot of people has become this optimization project. And I get why, because we have so many tools available to us that we've never had possible. We have access to things like continuous glucose monitors, sleep trackers, heart rate monitors, blood panels that tell us things that our GPs wouldn't have even thought to have ordered 10 years ago. And there's this whole ecosystem built around the idea that if you can measure it, you can improve it. And then there's the more extreme side of things. And I think most people by now have probably heard of Brian Johnson. He's that guy that's spending $2 million a year completely dedicated on a medical team, strict dietary protocols, and extensive biological testing, all in the pursuit to lower his biological age. He calls it Project Blueprint and the protocol. And depending on where you sit, he's either a visionary or a cautionary tale about what happens when optimization becomes the point of life itself. And I think at a certain level, you do have to start wondering, is a protocol actually living? But this conversation has filtered well beyond the extreme cases like Brian Johnson. People are tracking their macros, doing cold plunges, red light therapy, and fasting windows, which, I'm partial to a few of those things. And alongside that, there is a growing counter conversation as well that is growing about this over-optimization when it comes to our health and wellness. Because whether the obsession with the numbers is producing this kind of health anxiety that didn't exist before we had access to constant data. And where in all of this do you just eat a pizza and have a pint of ice cream? So this is why I'm saying there's tension in this episode, because I do think that this conversation does reveal something about the relationship between information and well-being, because I see 2 very different visions of where health is heading. And I don't think one is complete without the other, in all honesty, and I think they kind of do blend together so beautifully. So the first is this data-driven, tech-forward version where we have more wearables, more biosensors, AI diagnostics, precision medicine, all these tools and numbers that help us decide if we are healthy or not. And then there's the more holistic, conscious-centered version where well-being is understood as a psychological state that the body then follows. And what I think is really interesting is that science is actually starting to blend the gap between these two. And I don't know, I just think there's something really interesting happening in this space at the moment when we look at both of these things in combination and balance together. Okay, so if we want to look into the future, we have to take a little look back in time to notice the patterns. So I recently finished watching Outlander, and if you haven't seen it, it has been such a beautiful journey and so well worth the watch. So in the final season that just wrapped, the main character Claire, who works as a healer and as a surgeon throughout the entire series, she reflects on all the medical breakthroughs that would have been discovered back in her original time period of the 1960s. And a little bit of a spoiler, but watching her move through different time periods throughout the entire series and watching her sort of move through medicine and how she adapted was so amazing to watch. So she was using a lot of medicinal herbs throughout the series, and she learned to watch bodies through observation when she didn't have the technology of the 20th century. And she also figured out how to create penicillin from moldy bread, which is one of those moments that made me reflect about all those breakthrough moments of life-saving discoveries throughout time. And I do think that penicillin is worth having a little bit of a moment to pause on here because of the story itself. So Alexander Fleming in 1928 in his messy lab, he saw that there was mold going on a petri dish that was supposed to be thrown away. And he noticed that bacteria weren't growing near the mold and started asking why. And that single act of curiosity, of noticing something that most people would have disregarded, has ended up saving hundreds of millions of lives. And what is interesting is that indigenous and traditional medicine systems have been using moldy bread and soil compresses and antimicrobial plants for wound treatment for centuries before that discovery. So the knowledge has existed, but we didn't have a formal system for it yet. And that pattern shows up everywhere in medical history. So aspirin comes from willow bark, morphine from poppies, digoxin still used in heart treatment today from foxglove, and so many other plants being the foundation of our modern medicine. And a huge portion of our modern pharmacology has its roots in traditional botanical knowledge. And we spent majority of the 20th century treating that knowledge as primitive before eventually arriving back at many of the same conclusions through many clinical trials. So the natural world has always and will always offer us something when it comes to health and wellness. Science just opens up new possibilities of access and ease of use. And remembering where so much of it comes from, whether it's in its raw forms through food or processed into modern medicine, is worth holding on to. Because what history keeps telling us is that the places where medicine has gone furthest wrong has often been where we treated the body as a machine to be fixed rather than a system to be understood. So I want to share a little bit of my own history to kind of show the blending of these two together, because it is the reason I feel so strongly about integration rather than choosing one side of health and wellness being good or bad. So about a decade ago, I had something called cyclic vomiting syndrome. And if you know it, you know how horrible it is. It's episodic bouts of vomiting that can go on for hours every couple of days. And through a lot of my own tracking and dietary elimination, I identified food triggers: coconut, palm oil, things related to the palm tree family. I tracked everything, got blood work done, tried medications, did everything, and the data story was very clear. But it wasn't the full story. What I eventually understood through therapy and a lot of nervous system regulation work was that the condition was actually rooted in stress and nervous system response that had its origin in a near-death experience that I had. The food triggers were real, and they were sitting on top of something a little bit deeper. The foods that triggered the episodes were the ones that I was eating around the time of the original trauma. So my body had made an association that no doctor was going to actually show me until I saw it myself, really. So when I stopped treating data as a complete picture and started looking at the psychological layer as well, that's when things started to shift for me. So my allergies reduced and the episodes stopped. And it's funny because I had done everything right by conventional tracking standards, and the piece that actually ended up moving the needle was the one that didn't show up on a data set. And I'll be honest, is that I love data and I was tracking everything. So I get it, but it was the integration of the psychological that mattered with that, and not as a rejection of, the medicine and doctors and all of that, but just acknowledging that there's so much more complexity than a single data set can show you. So now, what does the future of health and wellness look like? What is my futuristic insights telling me? So where are we heading? Because the scientific trajectory and the more holistic vision of health are actually starting to find some common ground, even if you would describe them in completely different sets of terms. So on the tech side, the direction is clearly towards more integration. So wearable biosensors that track metabolic markers in real time with AI-assisted diagnostics that can catch disease before symptoms even appear. We have personalized medicine based on your genomic profiling, microbiome therapies that treat the gut as a kind of central operating nervous system for overall health. And even further out, you can have things like gene editing for inherited conditions, lab-grown organs, and even digital twins of humans that allow doctors to simulate how a specific body would respond to treatment before they even take it. So some of these are actually being developed as we speak today and are currently being used in clinical trials or very close to it. And the cumulative effect of all of this is a shift from reactive medicine, treating disease after it appears, to more predictive and preventative medicine. So these are all catching the signs before they actually start to emerge. And that's a huge shift when it comes to the history of medicine. And I want to bring in a reference to a movie such as Gattaca, which I always return to when I kind of think about the future of health. So if you haven't seen it, it is a film set in the future where genetic profiles determine your life opportunities. So this is from insurance, employment, relationships. These are all filtered through your biological data. And what the film does really well is shows us how the tools start as information and how it turns into infrastructure, and then it comes hierarchy. And that's something that has always kind of made me stop and question the future of health and wearable technologies and things like that, because it asks the bigger question of who has access to that data and who's making the decisions when they're using it. And a lot of that has to be answered right now. So we have period tracking apps sharing data with third parties, insurance models that could theoretically use wearable data to adjust their premiums, as well as employers with a vested interest in long-term health risk profile for the workforce. And so this data is going to become more granular and not less. And so the governance question around all of this isn't being answered fast enough. But on the more holistic side of things, when it comes to the future of health and wellness, it starts to get interesting because science is actually starting to back up a lot of its own holistic language. So chronic stress is now actually understood as a major driver of inflammation, immune dysfunction, and metabolic dysregulation. Trauma is also linked to elevated disease risk across multiple systems. Social isolation has also had measurable impact on people's cardiovascular health and longevity. And meditation changes brain structures in ways that we can actually see on MRIs. So the idea that an internal experience and physical health are deeply connected is no longer a fringe idea. And the disagreement is about mechanisms, not about whether the link is real anymore. So the future of health, when you pull on both of these threads together, starts to look like a framework where the body is understood as a system that responds to its environment, including its psychological environment, and where prevention is built into the way that we live rather than bolted on as a separate protocol, and where the technology is a tool for deeper understanding rather than a substitute for paying attention. So let's bring it all into today's context. So if we want a future where everything is blended, where we use technology as well as holistic understandings of our health to be balanced, I would say, not optimized, but balanced, how do we actually move in that direction from where we are today? So for anyone listening, I think the most honest starting point is getting curious about your own data without being captured by it. If you have a wearable, use it as a starting point for bigger questions rather than a verdict. So what does your sleep data tell you when you've had a stressful week versus a calm one? So what does your heart rate variability look like after different kinds of exercise or different kinds of social situations? Use the data to notice patterns, not to score yourself. And alongside that, start paying attention to what your intuition is telling you the data is not capturing. And this is important. This is learning your body itself, because there is a version of body literacy that doesn't actually require a device. You probably already know which foods leave you feeling heavy, which social environments drain you, and what kind of rest is actually restorative for you. And that knowledge matters, and it doesn't show up on a dashboard. And there is something I think about a lot when it comes to this idea of the bell curve of knowledge. So when you start knowing something, you know nothing. Then you learn a little bit and then you think you know everything. And the people sitting in that middle section of the curve can be the most dangerous because they have enough information to feel confident, but it's not enough to see what else is missing. And the more you actually learn about something, the more you realize how much you don't know. And I think this is true in academia, in leadership, and it's so important when it comes to our personal health as well. So a little data can be useful. The illusion of a complete picture can take you somewhere you didn't intend to go, though. And another thing worth doing, and there's so much research on this right now, is building routines around how you start and end your day. And I'm not a big fan of the idea of having a sleep score, but I do love the idea of sleep hygiene. And I think sleep and its relationship to our overall health is getting a lot of attention, and for good reason. It doesn't have to be complicated. For me, I have a whole shower routine before I go to sleep that helps me settle down. And even if I've had a night out on the wines, the pattern and the routine is so helpful for getting me into getting ready for bed. Not because an app told me, but because I know it feels good. So I really encourage people to let go of the idea of perfect health as a state that you can hold on to. I had a friend growing up who's a bodybuilder, and when we were younger, he kind of taught me this idea of the pursuit of perfection. So you go through all this work and it only ever lasts for a moment. Then the body finds its rhythm again and it starts its natural cycle of change. So there's nothing optimum to lock into really long term. And if it is true, then isn't it worth enjoying your body you have now, including the days where you aren't at your peak, for the sake of living a life worth living? And for those working in health and wellness, technology, or the broader ecosystem being built around the space, I think the integration question is the most important design question you can have right now. Tools that help people notice patterns and ask better questions will age much better than tools designed to deliver verdicts. And the governance of health data is not a legal team problem either. It is a product's value problem, and it deserves the same level of attention as the functionality itself. The most sophisticated thing you can build into a health product is genuine humility about what it does and what it doesn't capture. There is so much in the space I haven't even touched on. And I think one of the majority of them is how most of the research being done hasn't even considered women's health. So most of the biohacking research has only been done on men's health. And so it hasn't been calibrated for how women's bodies actually work across our hormonal or cyclic nature. That is a conversation I want to have properly at some point. And there is a whole other thread to pull on about what health looks like inside different kinds of community structures. Smaller and more cooperative living versus the urban density that most of us are embedded in. And that one will probably start to feel more connected to the Future of Cities episode we did a little while back, if you want to go listen to that. But for now, what I do want to leave you with is this. The future of health is not going to be resolved by choosing between data and intuition, between technology and consciousness. The most honest answer is probably somewhere in the middle, where the tools we are building help us understand ourselves better without replacing the act of actually paying attention to what our bodies are actually telling us. So what is the future of health and wellness? I think it's balance. And I think it's just living your life the way that you want to live it. So if today's episode got you thinking, you can come along and join your journey with us. We post nearly every day on Instagram, sharing our daily insights and inspirations for founders and future-facing leaders. It's a good place to stay curious. And if you're ready to go deeper, you can head over to our website at RobinsonHewitt.com. We work at the intersection of anthropology, emerging technology, and long-term systems change, helping future-facing leaders, organizations, and founders evolve, transform, and build the next era. If you're still orienting, we have a bunch of free resources available to help you on your own founder's journey. But if you're ready to take the leap, you can check out our services as well. Everything is linked below. Make sure to subscribe to check out next week's episode to help build a better future for everybody. And I will see you in the next one. Ciao.